How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be taking a look at Lady in the Water. This is from 2006 and is written, directed, and produced by M. Night Shyamalan. And right off the bat, I do want to say I love this DVD cover. It's got the motion lingual cover, and you can see her opening and closing her eyes there. Also a really nice intense blue. I know that's a little beside the point, but I like the case. Anyway, this movie stars Paul Giamatti and Bryce Dallas Howard. We also got a pretty big cast because we are dealing with the occupants of an apartment building. One that I really do want to point out is Bob Balaban, who plays a jaded film critic and brings a good bit of meta humor to this movie. But I want to point him out because not just is he an actor, he's actually a director, and he directed a ton of cool stuff. My Boyfriend's Back, a really underrated zombie comedy. Parents, a surreal horror film starring Randy Quaid. But he also directed the very first episode of Tales from the Dark Side. So just want to do a quick shout out to him and his career. But anyway, I guess we should start off talking about Lady in the Water in regards to M. Night Shyamalan's career. Early on in his career, The Sixth Sense, Signs, Unbreakable, some really good stuff and got people looking. But then we get to The Village and Lady in the Water, which kind of was a transitional phase for Shyamalan. A lot of people left those two movies going, I don't quite know what to think about that. And then after these two, he did make a few movies that were less than stellar. But I hadn't actually seen The Village and Lady in the Water until recently. A little bit ago on this channel, I covered The Village, and I have a review for that one. But I decided to watch Lady in the Water as well because I really wanted to fill in the gaps in my Shyamalan knowledge. And the thing is, this movie kind of had a bad reputation behind it, and having finally gotten a chance to see it, I can totally see where the bad reputation comes from. But at the same time, I don't feel it's 100% earned. The thing is, this movie has faults, but it also does a lot that I like. I see what it was going for, and I really do appreciate a lot of this movie, even though there are some definite glaring issues, you know. There's a whole lot of explaining the lore behind this fantasy world, and there's a whole lot of talking about all this stuff. Way too much explaining in this movie. And also the comedy, it's a more comedic movie than people give it credit for, but so much of the movie is dark and mysterious and serious that the fact that it's also a quirky comedy doesn't really come across, and in turn it just feels like the characters are weird and strange, you know, so the comedic element isn't as forefront as it really should be. And yeah, the ending of this movie drags on for a bit too long, but it's really different and interesting, and it doesn't work, but there's a lot that I do like behind it, and I found myself watching the movie going, yeah, that's not perfect, but still watching and enjoying it. You know, it still had me hooked, even though I could totally see what was wrong with it, you know, and so I think this is one that I did end up liking, but yeah, not the best, and I do wish it was a little better. But I kind of think of this movie as a sort of spiritual sequel to Unbreakable. In M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable, he asked, what if you had the real world, but superheroes were real? It was in like a realistic setting. And with this movie, well, superheroes are kind of like modern mythology and folklore. What if we did a movie that asked, what if folklore was real in the real world? So it's the same sort of genre meets reality type of concept, But Unbreakable was a little more understated, a little simpler, like Unbreakable wrapped up a little quickly, and this movie goes on a little long, and Unbreakable really grounded its concepts, and this one swings for the fences. So it's the same concept, but I definitely think Unbreakable nailed it a little bit more, but it is interesting to see the parallels between the films. I really need to sometime go back and do a rewatch of the Unbreakable trilogy. Good stuff in there. But anyway, I guess in order to further analyze this, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the plot. I'm not going to be doing any major spoilers, but that being said, I want to say my piece about a few of the plot points and make sure you guys have a basic understanding as to what this movie's about. So I'll go through, I'll do a little bit of an analysis, but I'll be avoiding the major spoilers. Anyway, we open up with Paul Giamatti's character, and I do want to say Paul Giamatti is really good in this movie as sort of just your average regular guy. He's an apartment manager who is going around and trying to solve the problems of the people in this apartment. We meet him when one of his new tenants comes in, and he's trying to show him the building, but also solve some issues, you know. For example, he has to kill this bug. I think it's like the opening scene, and we see the camera under the sink pointing up at Giamatti, and we don't actually ever see the bug, but we just get people talking about it and all the reactions of the people behind him. It's a funny scene. And then, like, the new guy meets this character in the stairwell. He's this weird guy who's, for a science experiment, he says, is only exercising one half of his body. So one of his arms is really strong and the other is scrawny, and same with his legs. And yeah, a weirdo. And we can see from these scenes that these are intended to be comedic. It's a clue in early on that this is kind of supposed to be a bit of a quirky comedy movie, but that being said, it doesn't really ring super hard as a comedy, so in turn you're like, boy, these are some weird moments. But yeah, this is more of a comedy than people let on. But anyway, one of Paul Giamatti's problems is someone's sneaking into the apartment's pool late at night and going swimming, and they can hear them, but whenever they try to go out, the pool's empty. They disappear, and the pool's filter is being mysteriously clogged with mud. Who's going swimming late at night? Well, one day he does manage to catch the person. Well, rather he sees her and then slips, and then she has to help him out. But it's actually Bryce Dallas Howard's character named Story. Yeah, kind of weird, a character in a story named Story. But it turns out she's a water nymph. Her species is kind of a muse to humans. They give someone inspiration, and they try to guide humanity in a positive direction. And she knows she's here to inspire a writer, but she doesn't know who the writer is, just that he's a writer. Doesn't know physical description, doesn't know age, doesn't even know the person's gender. So now Paul Giamatti has to go around the apartment talking to all these people, trying to figure out, hey, are you working on a book or anything? You doing any writing? And, you know, you get to meet the characters as Paul Giamatti is fixing little things in their apartments. It's, yeah, like I said, a bunch of wacky characters there. But the thing is, Paul Giamatti is really sad. He actually has a super, super tragic backstory that admittedly does kind of come out of nowhere, but you see that Paul Giamatti really wants to help Bryce Dallas Howard's character and is really trying to do his best. But anyway, it's not just completing the mission. There is a bad guy in this story. It's this big evil dog character that has a bunch of green hair on its back that mimics the grass so he can blend in and camouflage. But of course, there's a ton of rules. There's the dog character, and he's not supposed to go after the water nymph in certain situations because there's a big set of rules, and these rules are enforced by this weird trio of, like, monkey elders or something that no one's ever seen. And then Bryce Dallas Howard's character also has rules about what she can and can't say during her missions, but there's ways to get around and bend these rules in order to give Paul Giamatti clues. And also, other than the writer, other humans do play roles in her story, and they have to figure out what human is supposed to do what thing and try to kind of get the apartment together. But yeah, that is a ton of rules and a ton of explaining. You know, it is relatively complicated with not just the water nymph, not just the dog, but the dog's bosses who are monkeys, and this whole water nymph society that we don't ever really see too much of, with its own set of rules too, and then all the different things that the people need to do and figure out with vague clues. Yeah, it's a little bit too complicated. And as far as explaining goes, they do a thing in the beginning with a little bit of animation and backstory, and you can tell a movie's gonna be a little too complicated if it opens up with a big lore dump like this. But that being said, I did like the little cartoons, but also with the explaining, it's an Asian myth, and there's an Asian family in the building. Now, I think in reality, M. Night Shyamalan just made this up, but in the world of the movie, it's supposed to be Asian folklore, and there's this one girl, and she's like a party girl, and her mother's much more traditional, and in turn, the younger generation has to kind of squeeze details about this story out of the mother, who doesn't really trust Paul Giamatti because he's just an outsider. And we get the two going back and forth, and it is a fair bit of comedy there. So if you're going to do lots of lore dumps, if you're going to have long explanations, at least trying to repurpose the scene into a bit of comedy as well, give it multiple layers and doing it in a more interesting way, at least I get that, you know, so it still is a little bit complicated. But anyway, Bryce Dallas Howard has to find the person she's supposed to inspire, get him fully inspired so that he can write his book and change the world for the better, but then she has to escape on this great eagle, like the end of Lord of the Rings, you know, and there's certain conditions to get the eagle to actually come, and the dog's going to try to stop that, and it does lead to a finale that is fun, but it goes on a little bit too long, and they, you know, have to figure out what they're doing wrong and all that. But overall, I do like it. Pulls in a bunch of the neighbors, and you have to form this wacky team trying to do this supernatural task. And let's go into a few specifics I want to talk about. One, the cinematography in this movie actually does look really cool. Seeing the apartment building, the pool at night when no one's supposed to be there, and the mysterious creature in the grass, there's a bit of a liminal aspect to that pool at night, and the movie is shot very well. Although, granted, it's shot so nice and seriously that when some of the wacky comedic elements come out, it's hard to accept it being a comedy just because it looks so good. But that's just kind of this weird thing about it. I still would rather have this nice cinematography. Also, I like what this movie has to say about purpose, saying that each and every person matters, and each and every person has a purpose, and that, you know, the idea of figuring out what you want to do with your life and trying to leave a positive impact on the world for everybody. I really do like this message. I think it's important, and I think it really is nice, and it leads to a bunch of people coming together, and I do think that, you know, that is a really, really good part with this movie. But that being said, with the people coming together, I do find it a little strange just how quickly people accept this. I mean, Paul Giamatti, you know, a big loving guy, and I could see him eventually coming around, but he himself comes around really quick to the idea that this fairy tale is real. But then a bunch of other people get on board, and some of these characters, I'm like, what did Paul Giamatti say to this guy to get this, like, normal guy going, we have to solve the fairy tale, can we read the clues, what's going on? And I'm like, wow, how are so many people just getting on board with this crazy concept? Yeah, I don't know. It's still fun, you know, and like I said, the big flaws is it is too complex, it does drag on too much, and the comedy, the quirkiness doesn't shine through. But I really see, and I was watching this and I was thinking about it, I think this is a prime candidate for a remake, but not just a regular remake. I would love to see this movie remade as a TV miniseries. I mean, just think about it. If this movie was not a movie, but a TV miniseries, then all that lore could be spread out amongst multiple episodes, maybe even do a little animation each time explaining a little bit of the world at the opening, but it wouldn't feel like a big dump if we could sprinkle it across 8 or so episodes. Also, all the different and wacky characters, they would get way more time to be developed, way more time to get to know them, and way more time to accept that they're living in a fantasy world. And the ending going on for a little too long, if you have a longer story, that's a-okay. But also, the world since 2006 has kind of got more on with the idea of quirky characters solving a supernatural mystery and throwing a nice little dark touch. As a miniseries on, say, like HBO Max or Netflix, I could totally see this developing a cult following, so I would love to see this remade as an 8-episode miniseries. That would be the perfect way to redo this. But anyway, as I was saying, I see the flaws, and I could totally see some people going into this movie and coming out absolutely hating it. Personally, I think it's a little underrated. It's flawed, but I see where it's going for, and I really like what it's trying to do, even if it doesn't do it. And I think you really need to go in knowing that this is more of a comedy than the movie itself lets it on to be, and just try to enjoy it. But I also want to say, you know, the quirky characters, the dark and mysterious elements, I could really see this becoming some people's favorite M. Night Shyamalan movie, and I could totally see some people walking away from this movie absolutely in love with it. So it's not the best, but it, I think, is still worth a watch, even though it's not perfect. And, you know, yeah, maybe you'll hate it, but you might really like it, and I think it is kind of underrated. So I would say at least check it out once if you see it streaming somewhere or something. It's worth looking into, so I can recommend it, just know it's a little off. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you, you really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom, and not quite sure what it's going to be, but if you want to see me talk about more movies, you can find that right there. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Relevant playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.